Beneath the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic lies the wreckage of the RMS Titanic, once the pride of the White Star Line, now a chilling reminder of human pride. On her maiden voyage in April 1912, more than 2,000 passengers boarded, unaware that their dreams would soon be destroyed by icy waves. Imagine your own fate as a third-class passenger, like Margaret Rice and her 5 young sons, or Augusta Charlotta Lindblom, a 19-year-old Swedish girl. Squeezed into the belly of the unsinkable Leviathan, separated from the first-class luxury, what would you have witnessed in those final hours? It was a tragic hierarchy of survival, a heartless reflection of the rigid social classes of the early 20th century. Locked behind gates and barriers, the third-class passengers were left to their fate as the ship sank. As the poignant quote from ship survivor Jack Thayer echoes, "The sounds of people drowning are something that I cannot describe to you, and neither can anyone else. It is the most dreadful sound." Join us as we dive into the forgotten stories of the third-class passengers of the Titanic, whose lives and deaths were dictated not by their own choices, but by their ticket class. The birth of Leviathan. In the heart of Belfast, Northern Ireland, the colossal ship that would become the RMS Titanic began to take shape in 1909. Within the bustling Harland and Wolff shipyard, under the watchful eye of shipbuilder Thomas Andrews, the Titanic was born, not merely a ship, but a symbol of mankind's unyielding pursuit of greatness. Tales of her construction swirled, one of the most notable being the riveting account of the Rivet Gang, the unsung heroes who hammered in nearly 3 million rivets to fuse Titanic's massive steel plates together. The keel-laying ceremony on March 31, 1909, marked the start of this monumental endeavor. As the hull rose, encased by a 228-foot-high gantry, the Titanic's birth took form. Innovations like her double-bottomed hull, watertight compartments, and the Marconi wireless telegraph system showcased cutting-edge advancements for the time. The Titanic promised luxury, safety, and grandeur. However, a chilling irony lingered. Despite her advanced features, the ship was woefully under-equipped with lifeboats, a fatal oversight driven by aesthetics over practicality. A symbol of opulence, Titanic was the second of 3 Olympic-class liners commissioned by the White Star Line. Yet during construction, she was known only as Ship 401. When finally launched on May 31, 1911, she was christened Titanic, a name now forever etched in maritime history. No one could foresee the tragic fate awaiting this majestic vessel, built with dreams as grand as the sea itself. The unrivaled opulence of the Titanic. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was the pinnacle of luxury, embodying the Edwardian era's fascination with grandeur. This floating palace, designed for the elite, promised an experience unlike anything before it. On board, first-class passengers were treated to a marvelous world of opulence, with spaces more splendid than the finest hotels of the time. Upon entering, guests were greeted by the Titanic's crowning jewel, the Grand Staircase. Crafted from the finest oak, its polished steps gleamed beneath a huge glass dome. At the top, a clock, etched with the words "Honor and Glory, Crowning Time," served as a poignant symbol, foreshadowing the ship's tragic fate. The first-class dining saloon, resplendent with silverware and sparkling chandeliers, became a gathering place for notable figures such as Colonel John Jacob Astor IV. Here, meals were not only a feast for the senses, but also a celebration of culinary excellence, with Chef Auguste Escoffier's influence. Beyond dining, the Titanic offered unparalleled recreational facilities. Passengers could indulge in fitness at the gymnasium, try the mechanical camel or rowing machine, or relax at the Turkish baths. Intellectual pursuits were catered to with a well-stocked library, while social spaces like the Café Parisia mimicked the cafes of Paris, offering a slice of European elegance on the high seas. In every detail, from its luxurious interiors to its exclusive offerings, the Titanic was a floating monument to human ambition. Its passengers, enjoying the splendor of the ship, had no inkling that the ship's fate was sealed, and their lives were to become part of the vessel's tragic legacy. The tale of Titanic's third-class passengers. While the Titanic's first-class passengers reveled in luxury, the third-class passengers lived a very different reality, though one filled with hope and dreams of a better future. Many aboard were immigrants, eager for a new life in America. These passengers, often traveling with little more than a few belongings, were housed in modest quarters below deck, far from the splendor above. Rooms were simple, furnished with bunk beds, a wash basin, and small cabinets, far from the opulence enjoyed by the elite. Despite the cramped conditions, the White Star Line made strides to improve the third-class experience. Unlike other ships, the Titanic's third-class accommodations were heated, and passengers enjoyed more comfort than they had ever known before. While first-class passengers enjoyed the finest meals and entertainment, the third class offered a more communal experience. Passengers shared meals of porridge, smoked herring, and hearty dinners, which reflected the diverse cultural backgrounds aboard, including Irish, Italian, and Scandinavian influences. The common room served as a place for passengers to gather, share stories, and play music. Irish immigrants like Margaret Molly Brown even entertained fellow passengers with Gaelic songs, creating an atmosphere of camaraderie amidst the hardships. Despite the differences in their living conditions, the third-class passengers felt a sense of community, supporting each other through their shared journey. However, when disaster struck, the reality of their situation became painfully clear. First-class passengers were alerted to the iceberg in time to prepare, while those below decks were only made aware when water began flooding their quarters. The chaos that ensued left many third-class passengers disoriented, struggling to find their way to safety. Families like the Goodwins, who had dreamed of a new life in America, were tragically lost. For many of the third-class passengers, the Titanic symbolized hope, hope for a better life, an escape from the old world. The fate of these individuals, often forgotten in the shadow of the disaster's opulent upper deck, represents a poignant reminder of the human cost of the tragedy. Unraveling daily life on the Titanic. The RMS Titanic, launched with grandeur and opulence, was not just a ship, but a floating society that mirrored the social divisions of early 20th century life. On April 10, 1912, as the ship set sail from Southampton, passengers were greeted by a blend of luxurious indulgence and routine maritime life that defined daily experiences on board. For first-class passengers, mornings began with a knock from a steward at 7:30 a.m., signaling the start of a day filled with lavish meals, socializing, and indulgence. Breakfast was served in the grand dining saloon, with rich dishes like grilled mutton chops, while third-class passengers dined on simpler fare in communal dining halls. The Titanic also boasted cutting-edge amenities, including a gymnasium for first-class guests, who could work out under the guidance of instructor Thomas Macaulay. After lunch, the ship's decks came alive with activities. Women promenaded in their finest attire, while men engaged in card games, reading, or simply enjoying the ocean breeze. Evenings were a spectacle, with passengers donning tuxedos and gowns for a lavish 10-course dinner in the dining saloon, while third-class passengers, despite their modest accommodations, found joy in music and dancing. As night fell, the Titanic's lounges became hubs of entertainment, offering music, fine drinks, and conversation. Yet, amid this splendor, the crew worked tirelessly to maintain operations. The luxurious routines of the Titanic's passengers would soon be interrupted by a disaster that none could have anticipated. The Titanic's tryst with destiny. On the moonless night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic, billed as the Unsinkable ship, met its tragic fate in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The luxury liner, a marvel of modern engineering, was on its maiden voyage when disaster struck. At 11:40 p.m., lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee spotted an iceberg looming ahead. Despite their desperate warnings, "Iceberg right ahead!" the Titanic was unable to avoid the collision. The iceberg scraped along the ship's starboard side, creating gashes that stretched over 300 feet, breaching several watertight compartments. Captain Edward Smith, after consulting with shipbuilder Thomas Andrews, realized the ship's fate was sealed. The Titanic, once deemed unsinkable, was doomed to sink in a matter of hours. As the passengers slowly grasped the horror unfolding, distress signals were sent into the night sky and lifeboats were launched, but they were woefully insufficient for the 2,200 people on board. The Women and Children First protocol was variably enforced, leading to confusion and chaos. As the ship sank, the orchestra continued playing, offering a melancholy soundtrack to the disaster. The Titanic's tragic descent, as its lights flickered out, marked the end of an era, a testament to human ambition meeting the unforgiving power of nature. The heart-wrenching struggle of lifeboats on the Titanic. The Titanic's sinking was not just a maritime disaster. It was a struggle for survival that played out in the lifeboats, the few makeshift islands of safety amid the freezing waters. The Titanic carried only 20 lifeboats, which could hold a mere 1,178 people, despite the ship's full capacity of over 2,200. This was not an oversight, but a calculated decision to preserve the ship's aesthetics, made by J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director of the White Star Line, and the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews. As the Titanic began its final descent into the Atlantic, confusion reigned. While some officers adhered to the Women and Children First protocol, others made exceptions, allowing men to board if no women or children were nearby. The first lifeboat, 7, launched with only 28 people aboard, far below its capacity of 65. As more boats were launched, some filled with only a handful of people, the chaos of the evacuation became even more apparent. One of the most poignant tales was that of Lifeboat 6, where Molly Brown, a first-class passenger, urged the women to row and stay warm despite the tension among passengers. Meanwhile, Fifth Officer Harold Lowe showed extraordinary courage by returning to the wreckage to rescue survivors. But the true heartbreak came with the collapsible lifeboats, like Lifeboat D, which carried survivors who clung to hope amidst the icy waves. As dawn broke, the survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia, but the events of that night left scars that would haunt maritime history forever. Heart-rending accounts of Titanic's survivors. When the Titanic sank beneath the icy waves of the Atlantic on April 15, 1912, the voices of survivors began to tell the world what had happened in those harrowing hours. Among the most remarkable survivors was Violet Jessup, a stewardess who had already survived a similar collision aboard the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, the previous year. Despite the chaos of the sinking, Jessup remained calm and composed, even taking care of a baby in Lifeboat 16. Her survival story was one of fate, as she later joked that upon rescue, a woman snatched the child from her arms, declaring herself the child's mother. J. Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line director, was aboard Lifeboat 1, which launched with only 12 passengers, including Ismay himself, who was criticized for surviving while so many others perished. His actions would forever stain his reputation. On a more uplifting note, the story of Molly Brown, who became known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, stood out. She motivated the women in her lifeboat to row and keep warm, and later played a pivotal role in supporting fellow survivors. Another poignant story came from Ruth Becker, just 12 years old at the time. She was separated from her family during the chaos, ending up in a lifeboat while watching her mother and siblings drift away into another. Ruth would carry the trauma of that night for years, but she went on to live a fulfilling life, becoming a teacher. The last survivor, Melvina Dean, was just a baby when the Titanic sank. She would later share her memories and become a symbol of the tragedy's lasting impact on all who lived through it. The myths and mysteries of Titanic. The Titanic tragedy has long been surrounded by myths, legends, and a sense of awe that refuses to fade. One of the most persistent myths is the Titanic's infamous reputation as the unsinkable ship. This perception emerged from the advanced engineering of the ship, including watertight compartments, which were revolutionary for their time. The notion of invincibility was further fueled by the press and promotional materials from the White Star Line. However, this myth led to fatal overconfidence, influencing critical decisions during the voyage, including the insufficient lifeboat provisions and the ship's speed despite iceberg warnings. While the phrase, "the ship that God himself couldn't sink," has been attributed to crew members, it's now believed to be a sensationalized fabrication that only deepened the tragedy. Another mystery is the legend of the mummy's curse, often linked to the Egyptian artifact of Princess Amun-Ra. Despite its allure, no evidence has ever been found to support the claim that this ancient relic was on board, yet it remains an enduring part of Titanic lore. Additionally, stories about eerie prophecies from Titanic's passengers and crew, like the tragic predictions made by journalist William T. Stead, continue to intrigue. These tales add to the complexity of the Titanic's legacy, mixing fact with fiction and leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The aftermath of Titanic's tragedy. When Titanic sank, its loss echoed across the globe, triggering profound changes in maritime law. The Carpathia's heroic rescue efforts of the survivors painted a stark picture of the devastating loss. Over 1,500 souls were claimed by the icy waters. News of the disaster shocked the world, leading to immediate inquiries by the United States Senate and the British Board of Trade. These analyses aimed to uncover the causes of the tragedy and ensure such a disaster would never happen again. The U.S. inquiry focused on issues like the insufficient number of lifeboats, the ship's speed, and the crew's failure to heed iceberg warnings. The British inquiry highlighted the class disparities in survival rates, showing that first-class folks were far more likely to survive than those in third class. These investigations sparked sweeping reforms, including the establishment of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, in 1914, ensuring ships were equipped with enough lifeboats for all passengers and crew. The Titanic's legacy continues to influence maritime safety regulations, underscoring the importance of learning from this tragedy. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. We'll see you soon.